Welcome to the recorded version of the Grantmakers and Aging web seminar, New Engines for a New Economy, Advancing 50-Plus Self-Employment and Entrepreneurship, featuring Elizabeth Isele, co-founder and CEO of Senior Entrepreneurship Works, Greg O'Neill, Director of the National Academy on an Aging Society at the Gerontological Society of America, Stacey Easterling, Program Executive at the Atlantic Philanthropies, and John Feather, CEO of Grantmakers and Aging, from June 10, 2013. This event was made possible by a partnership between Grantmakers and Aging, the John A. Hartford Foundation, and the Atlantic Philanthropies. Technical and production support is provided by the American Society on Aging.
According to the latest research by the MetLife Foundation, 25 million older adults want to start their own business or nonprofit. Indeed, recent research from other projects show that the highest rate of business startup activity over the past decade has been among people in the 55 to 64-year age bracket. This interest is growing at a critical time. This longevity economy is a tremendous opportunity. Older adults' self-employment contributes to their own health, well-being, and financial security, as well as to the nation's through their business job creation and their continuing contributions to Social Security and Medicare. We are pleased to have some of our nation's best experts to guide us through this discussion. Elizabeth Isele is co-founder and CEO of SeniorEntrepreneurshipWorks.org and also founder of SavvySeniorsWork.com and CyberSeniors.org. She launched her life as a serial social entrepreneur after a 30-plus year career as an editor, an author, and as a philanthropic leader, first at the Great Bay Foundation in Maine, and then at the Philanthropy Roundtable in Washington, D.C. Greg O'Neill is director of the National Academy on an Aging Society, the Public Policy Institute of the Gerontological Society of America. The Academy conducts, synthesizes, and disseminates research on issues related to population aging and publishes the quarterly Public Policy and Aging Report. In 2009, he founded the Aging Means Business Conference to help companies better understand the needs and wants of the older consumer. Stacey Easterling is program executive at the Atlantic Philanthropies, where her work focuses on supporting the social action and economic security of older adults, particularly in low-income seniors and communities of color. We welcome you all. If we move to the next slide, Elizabeth, let's start with you. What are the trends we're seeing of older adults starting new businesses?
Well, this is, first of all, I'd like to welcome all the people that are participating in this as well and just look upon this as a great learning opportunity in terms of what seniors are now contributing. They're no longer a deficit, and we've made great inroads in terms of persuading people that they are economic engines. And one of the most recent justifications or really accreditation of that was when Greg and O'Neill and I were meeting with Senator Bill Nelson's team and about a hearing that we're hoping to have next fall, a Senate hearing, and Senator Nelson's staff, chief of staff, said, I haven't had anything as positive to talk about regarding aging in a long, long time. So this is a movement that is finally getting some traction, and we are changing a paradigm that's been in place for too long. Let me put Greg on a minute.
Thank you, and also welcome to everyone on the line today. In this slide, we were just giving you a bit of a highlight of the many articles that some of you may have noticed that are starting to be picked up by the popular press on this topic of older adult entrepreneurship. And really, I think for a lot of people, it kind of goes against conventional wisdom to think about the old as entrepreneurs, but truly entrepreneurship is not just owned by young people. We have tremendous stories and many, many articles that have featured older adults doing this. It's really driven, I think, in part by the aging of the baby boom and tomorrow's seniors who are really looking to create a different kind of retirement. So with that, I think we can move to the next slide, John.
So if we move on, Elizabeth, what do we know about the desire to start new businesses by older entrepreneurs?
There's a great desire of seniors to start new businesses. It's something that has derived from when I started my first nonprofit, SavvySeniorsWork.com. It was all about helping seniors retain their position in the workforce longer, because seniors knew that with an additional 20 to 30 years of life, they maybe needed different ways to underwrite that. And after 3.5 years and going through the recession with Savvy Seniors, I realized through the feedback from the seniors who were, and this was a blog that really had a global audience, and it kept getting comments about, well, this is wonderful, I'm terribly well prepared, but there are no jobs available, and I've been laid off, and what are my other options? And that's when we first started thinking about seniors starting their own businesses, be they a small business, a little micro business, up to $1 million jelly bean businesses. So it runs all over the map. And we have some data on the screen right now about the boom itself, and Greg will fill you in on some of those statistics.
Thank you, Elizabeth. And John, as you noted in the introduction, about 25 million older adults want to start businesses or nonprofits. That's according to a series of surveys that were fielded by the MetLife Foundation, along with a group in San Francisco called Encore.org. And that's referred to in the first bullet on this slide. The second slide refers to what we also have, which is that these findings in general have been reinforced by a lot of research by the Kauffman Foundation, which, as you mentioned in the outset, has found that over the past decade, and even through the recession, the 55 to 64-year age group had the highest rate of entrepreneurial activity. To put that in a slightly different context, Kauffman says that Americans who are age 55 to 64 start some 10,000 businesses a month. That's 2007, 2008 data. And again, that's more than any other age group. So this is more than just a trend. This is really something that when the Kauffman Foundation, who is really the leading foundation in entrepreneurship, decided to focus their lens on older adults, they really found these surprising data that had been going on for decades, and no one had really paid very close attention to it. In our last bullet there, we have, this is really just released data from a large survey, a global survey, in fact, of entrepreneurship. And it found that among people 65 plus who are still in the workforce, so that means older adults who are still working, more than 42% were entrepreneurs with incorporated or non-incorporated businesses. And again, you can see on that slide much higher than the 55 to 64-year age group, and a significant jump over the last time that they looked at it. So this trend is real, and it's rapidly emerging. So with that, I think we can go to the next slide.
And Elizabeth, on the next slide, we have some pictures of entrepreneurs. Can you tell us a little bit about their story?
Yes. The first woman on the left is Inez Killingworth from Ohio, from Cleveland, Ohio. And this is a woman who really started a business after age 60, after retiring as a school janitor. And she was very tired of walking home and seeing all the homes in her neighborhood derelict, just the whole neighborhood going down because people were forced out of their houses because they couldn't pay for their mortgages anymore. And she started this organization called ESOP, which stands for Empowering and Strengthening Ohio's People. And it grew to a statewide effort, and indeed there are programs all over the country now that were catalyzed from this very beginning movement by a 60-year-old former middle school janitor in Ohio. The second picture is Paul Tasner, and he is one of our green entrepreneurs, and that's an interesting statistic. Also, more than 60% of the seniors with whom we work are starting green businesses. And Paul was a retired executive in an organization in California and wanted to start his own business, but wanted it to be a green business. So his business is called PulpWorks.com. And as he says, he takes everybody's garbage and forms it into packaging, different packaging for companies to utilize. And he said his biggest challenge is persuading companies to pay the extra pennies for a package that is biodegradable, but he's making great inroads and came up second in a national award for a green company in 2011. The woman at the bottom of the page is another actual green businesswoman, this Jill Curtullo, who lives in Wisconsin, and her business is repurposing sweaters. She goes out to secondhand shops and Goodwill stores and buys old sweaters, cuts them up, and puts them into designer creations. And she started marketing these on Etsy, the online site where for people selling handmade products. And she started out with one shop on Etsy, and now she has 4 different shops on Etsy, and her business has expanded phenomenally. And as she said, one of her greatest joys is she's keeping all these sweaters out of the landfills. I think we can go to the next slide then, John.
Well, that's very interesting, Elizabeth. All very different examples of people trying new things that not necessarily were their extensions of their existing career. So, Greg, as we move to this next slide, tell us something about what we know about self-employment in older adults.
Sure. Thanks, John. A lot of this data here that I'm presenting comes from AARP, whose members, as many of you know, about a third of or more of AARP members are not retired, and in fact are leaning heavily on AARP to help them navigate things like self-employment or working. So they've started to really look at this area and have collected some nice data that we're showing here, which basically shows that about 1 in 5 workers over 50 in the United States is self-employed. So a lot of people, again, these are surprising numbers. I think the second bullet to me is probably the most interesting. So AARP asked, are these people who have been employed, in their own businesses or had their own businesses their entire lifetime, or how many of them made this start after 50? And as you can see there, fully 1/3 of self-employed became self-employed at or after age 50. And that to them is, something of great interest. It's of great interest to us too. Who are these new entrepreneurs who take this path after age 50? And what we do know is that they're somewhat different than those who have been in self-employment their entire life or have had a business of their own and they're just aging. They tend to be a little bit more likely to be low income and to be female. So what we're seeing, and what AARP thinks here, is that you're seeing people who are moving into this as maybe a result of encountering age discrimination in the marketplace, or perhaps it's something else, just doing something they've always wanted to do. And the other data points there really just sort of show again that self-employment increases with age. There's a lot of ways to say that. Those bullets say it a couple different ways, but it really does. And so when you're looking at the older adult workforce, a higher percentage essentially is self-employed or with their own small business. Again, to some people that may seem to make sense. You as you get through your life, you accumulate experience and wisdom, and you have the resources and tools to start your own business. And so that might make sense, but indeed that is what happens. And the last bullet, which actually comes from very new data from the Small Business Administration, who again has just developed an initiative in this area to look closer at older adult self-employed and see how the federal government Small Business Administration can help them, found something that was really interesting, and that's that those who are self-employed or have their own businesses, in response to saying, when do you expect to retire, have a much higher average retirement age that they expect to retire at than those who are working, in regular jobs for wage and salary. So I think that we can go to the next slide.
Okay. So in the next slide, Elizabeth, we have some ideas about trends leading older people to want to do this. Could you say a little bit about that?
Yes. For the first time in their lives, boomers, especially the younger boomers, who have raised a family, gone to work to be the breadwinner in the family, and had all kinds of responsibilities in terms of raising their children, getting them through college or community college, or just getting them to an age when they can get out into the world on their own and paying their mortgages, et cetera. And now they don't have those requirements anymore. So they're proactively thinking, well, what can I be doing? Suddenly they have 20 to 30 years that they had not, for the most part, anticipated. So they're thinking not only how am I going to underwrite those years, but they're also thinking, what do I want to do with those years? And some of the ways in which they want to do something is, again, sometimes to underwrite the rest of their life, or they're also wish to create a business that's like a legacy business with younger people. One of the greatest assets in this program is the intergenerational aspect of it. And as we always like to say, prosperity is multi-generational. And so with the seniors wishing to engage and stay engaged with younger people, wishing to remain engaged and be certainly on top of, if not ahead of, the technology learning curve, this offers them an opportunity now that they have this freedom from their responsibilities. And what they feel they want to do and what many of them need help actually with in terms of making this next transition is, how do I leverage my lifetime of experience, expertise, and connections into a marketable skill or a product? And this is one of the most challenging places for people to be able to get a grasp of what they have done in their life before. And it's really thinking entrepreneurially about their life, how they have lived it, and what they want to do next. And the very last bullet is really their desire to give back and to help others. And one of the ways in which that's most significantly manifesting itself is their desire to start green businesses. They've seen what their generation has done to the planet, and while they may not be able to roll that back, they want to prevent further deterioration. So there's a tremendous desire to do that. There's also a tremendous desire to help other people, whether it's younger people coming up, whether they're mentoring them, whether they're helping them start businesses, or just helping them to move forward, the younger generation in their own lives. There's a sense of really, truly wanting to help others and feeling that, I have this body of experience. I have all this expertise. How can I use it to help younger people who do not have this lifetime of experience and expertise? Greg, did you want to add to that? Okay.
I think Elizabeth has covered all the major pull factors. So if we want to discuss also some of the...
Why don't we move to the next slide then and talk about some of the things that are, instead of pulling people towards this, pushing them in that direction. Greg?
Thanks. Yeah, and I alluded to some of these in my previous comments that, of course, a lot of this has also been driven by the recent recession and people's inability to get back in the workforce, either if they're looking for a job for their first employment or where they've been unemployed and we're trying to get back in. There are significant problems that older adults are facing getting back in there, and we have data from the federal government that's really quite stark. It shows that older adults, their chances of getting reemployed, especially when they're 50 and over, are about twice as bad as younger adults, and they spend significantly more months on average out of a job when they lose one before they get in. And then we may know that, in fact, they don't, and they drop out of the employment role. So it's a significant problem, and of course, in some cases, what the response of individuals is to strike out on their own and set up their own business or go into some form of entrepreneurship. The other side of this is that a lot of people still find that in the regular workforce, there's not a lot of flexibility, and they may have a lot of demands on them, whether it's caregiving later in life or their own health issues, and they just want to scale back a bit and have a bit more flexibility, and that is actually still very hard to find in the traditional workforce. This is something that myself, through funding from the Atlantic Philanthropies over the last few years, we've looked a lot at how to expand work roles and volunteer roles for older adults. And what we always find is that often organizations just don't seem to want to offer the non-9 to 5 route for people in the workforce. And that just doesn't work if you have serious caregiving responsibilities or a disability or health problems. So there are of course push factors that push people into choosing this area of employment.
Elizabeth, anything to add?
No, I think those are primarily the push factors, getting people back into earning a wage in a way that they feel comfortable. And many people feel that they've put a lot of time and work into this career that they've had for a lifetime, and they don't want to remove themselves from the workforce or from society in general, but they'd much rather do it on their own terms at this point.
So as we move to the next one then, let's continue that theme. That all of these things are great, but what does it also do for us as a country and as a society in general?
As a society in general, we have a huge resource in this demographic, the size of the demographic, their experience and their expertise, and do not utilize that resource would certainly be to the detriment of our society. And part of that also is what I alluded to in the last slide in terms of their wanting to contribute and to give back to society. One of in our research, and certainly our anecdotal research with all the people who have participated in senior entrepreneurship work, is the key word that they use is they want to remain relevant. And what that means for society, if we have engaged, contributing members of society who feel that they are relevant, their mental and physical health is much greater and much more positive than someone who's withdrawn and cut off from society and has all kinds of health problems. So I think one of the major health factors here is that with these people still being engaged, they are healthier longer. They're not just living an additional 20 to 30 years of life. They're living them in a very vital, contributing manner. The second, why it matters is, the second bullet is it helps workers compensate for their inadequate savings. And what it does, through their own work and through their own revenue generated from that work, they're becoming individually economically self-reliant. And that's a huge thing for them to have, so they're certainly not drawing down on any entitlement program, which brings us to the third bullet, which it does promote economic growth. If you have an individual starting a business, they're creating jobs so that other person is employed. In the community, they'll be reaching out for other services and products to support their business. So they're boosting the local economic growth in that community. And we call it the bubble up effect. And that all of this asset development and wealth growth it spreads throughout the community and throughout the country. And as again, the other factor is that if they have their own businesses and are employed, that they are contributing to Social Security. They're not depleting Social Security. There was an article in the New York Times this weekend about, we need the right wrench to fix Social Security. And it's the kind of thing I read and I think, well, we have a wrench. We have a wrench in terms of people who are still contributing to it. But more and more people in this country still believe that the seniors are depleting it, or they just want to sit back in their rocking chairs and take advantage of these entitlement programs, which is far, far from the case. I'll let Greg contribute to that too before I get too incensed.
Well, just to echo what Elizabeth was saying, I agree it matters for those very same reasons that older adult entrepreneurs are kind of writing a new narrative about aging, and one that's not just all doom and gloom as you see in the papers every day, where the aging of the baby boom, is a tsunami that's going to wreck this country. When you look at it in this way, the way we've been presenting and learning about what many older adults are doing with their own businesses, you really see that this is, as Elizabeth said, it's something that's going to make our Social Security and Medicare bills easier to pay. It's going to boost our economy. And it's really going to also, and this is rarely mentioned, I think it's going to help the overall sort of entrepreneurial sort of dynamic in the United States. then that's good for everybody, all generations, young and old. And there are, of course, all kinds of ways that young and old can collaborate on these kind of entrepreneurial activities. And that's something we'll talk a little bit about as we get on to the next slides.
Well, as we turn to the next slide, I want to remind our audience that you can start entering questions in the question box that's on your that should be on your screen. So if you just go to the question section and click down there and type your question in, I will be asking those after we finish the presentations just a little bit later, but go ahead and start doing that if you would. So I understand that you had a summit meeting on this issue recently. Who was involved in this?
Yes, the summit was in October 2012. It's called New Engines for a New Economy. And what Elizabeth and I did here was invite thought leaders from all kinds of areas, since we saw this as an issue that was emerging and one that really we needed input from people where they were in business, government, or banking, providing access to capital to small businesses, or on the other side in education or nonprofits, maybe helping older adults figure out if this was a path for them, and also to hear from actual older adults who had started up their own companies. And then, of course, we wanted in the room people who might be involved with the kind of public policies we'd need to push this further. So on the slide, the bullets give you some, and I'm sorry, there's a lot of acronyms here, but these agencies have long names, so we have to do something. But it essentially, you see here that we had like people from Treasury and the Small Business Administration, but also places like the Environmental Protection Agency, very interested, as Elizabeth said, in seniors who are starting green businesses, and that's a trend that they are aware of. We have nonprofits and others, and including banks. And I'll let Elizabeth talk about some of those other players, including special players in the education area.
Well, the other thing that when you asked John, why is this good for us as a society, why is it good for us as a country, these seniors also present a new market opportunity. And when we invited people like Capital One, TD Bank, and even the small business and micro lenders, what they are coming to understand is that this is a whole new lending market for them. This is to be able to get, again, from the private lenders for very high, what they call the gazelle business startups, to have access to capital for them, to be able for the small business lenders and the micro lenders like Axion, or now Kiva.org is another one in the United States, or the whole CDFI fund, which is the Community Development Financial Institutions, or the CFED, which is Community Financial Economic Development. And I was just this morning at a wonderful conference at the Treasury Department. And this was, the whole title of the conference is Access to Capital Innovation. And again, I was there speaking on behalf of seniors entrepreneurs in that they are a new market for all of the different ways in which traditionally in this country we have capitalized business startups. And there's a great deal of excitement growing about this because at the conference, Karen Mills, the director of the SBA, was there, and she was very excited to talk about small businesses and how they're driving the country, and 2 out of every 3 new jobs are created in small businesses. And she said, actually, there's 28 million small businesses in this country that are driving the economy. And I looked at Greg when he was talking about the 25 million seniors that want to start their own businesses, and it suddenly dawned on me that we can almost double the size of new business startups with this cohort. And it's truly exciting, and people are finally beginning to understand what's in it for them to support these business startups. And it's a hugely exciting opportunity. And I think probably we can go to the next slide from that point.
Yeah, and so as we do move on to the next one, what did you learn from the summit?
I'll take that. Well, one of our most interesting findings from the summit was that people wanted more summits, which we were glad to hear. But it was, I think this was partly because when we had the people in the room, one of the first comments many people said was, I don't know any of these people in the room. We discovered that people really are in this are somewhat in silos. And so we were, I think, without really realizing it, we were bringing together people on a new issue, and we really had, from the beginning, tried to be cross-sector. So, as I mentioned before, have people from all different areas of this issue. So we really just scratched the surface. But many of the things, and these are kind of the highlights on this slide, was that people really did agree that the language today is all in terms of sort of what you can't do. When you're talking about aging, it's really not very positive. When you're talking about older adults, it's not seeing them as we've said now a couple of times, it's not seeing them as people who could contribute and can continue to participate in the economy. So they thought there were serious issues there to do in terms of reframing the way we talk about all this and really getting at the potential. But they also thought it was important to make sure that we figure out where there are any kind of policies, whether it's around public funding or tax incentives that might help. They definitely saw the need for ways to help older adults, many of whom may have never gotten a loan before or have very good credit, ways to get them access to small amounts of capital, the way we actually do better for the developing world than we do for ourselves with these microloans, to bring some of these ideas really to full fruition here so that we can help older adults get their companies going. And I should emphasize, as Elizabeth said, that some of these big players who are at this conference focus only on low-income and minority populations in terms of their lending. So they are aware that this is for all income groups, all SES. Of course, when you say entrepreneurship, many people think of the kind of Mark Zuckerberg, Facebook, Microsoft kind, but that's just a tiny, tiny part of the overall landscape, which is really just a lot of mom and pops and people from all kinds of different backgrounds. And then the other thing is, and I think we mentioned this a little bit as well earlier, was that we still don't know much about sort of why someone picks this course. What we do know is that some people hold it for a lifetime. They start a small business and they're always in small business or creating the kind of serial entrepreneurs, you might call them. But other people definitely go in and out. They work a while for regular pay at a regular organization, and then they try the entrepreneurial path. We don't know really what makes people do this, and we certainly don't know what makes older adults pick this course later in life. We just have ideas about the kind of push-pull factors we were talking about before, but we still have a lot to learn. And so there's definitely a research questions that came out of this, as well as very practical questions about how we help seniors today advance their businesses.
As we go to the next one then, and we continue to talk about the outcomes of the summit, were there new connections and new ventures that came from the summit?
Yes, there were tremendous new connections and ventures. And as Greg said, people keep asking us when we're going to have more, and the people that participated in the summit, we made it very clear at the beginning that this was not just a group of thought leaders as talking heads. This was really a very proactive group in terms of creating a blueprint. We wanted a cross-sector blueprint of what it would take to support, sustain ongoing senior entrepreneurship in this country. And out of that, directly from that meeting, we had people from San Francisco, particularly led by the individual who's the director of Impact IQ, who wants a similar summit in San Francisco. In New York City, we're going to be working with Mayor Bloomberg's office and the New York Academy of Medicine. And it may not be Mayor Bloomberg's office because they're hoping to have it after the election. So it won't be Mayor Bloomberg himself, but these are the initiatives that he's put in place in New York City to make it one of the World Health Organization's age-friendly cities. And the last is our summit that we're going to be co-hosting with Senior Enterprise in Dublin, Ireland. And this is an organization that had actually contacted us and said, we want to learn more about what you're doing in senior entrepreneurship. particularly the summit that you hosted, said, we have a very small grant from the EU. And I said, well, how small is small? And he said, 2 million euros. And I nearly dropped the phone. I said, you must never speak to a U.S. nonprofit and say you have a 2 million euro grant and it's small. But at any rate, their program, the Senior Enterprise Ireland, has been held up as the model program by the EU and by Prince Charles's Prince's Fund in the UK as the model program for senior enterprise as an economic driver in Europe. In many ways, Europe is ahead of us in this arena. So it's very exciting that they want to partner with us and co-host a summit, which will also be a similar cross-sector summit in Dublin this fall. It will be in October. The research that Greg referred to is extremely important because we have all kinds of anecdotal information about this group of individuals, about this demographic, but we need quantitative data, and we've been working with Stanford Center on Longevity, specifically in their financial security section under Martha Deavy. And we're helping them design a research project so to get at some of the questions that came from our summit in terms of who is this cohort and what are the different factors that lead to their success in this arena. And then last but not least, Greg and I have been making the rounds on Capitol Hill and speaking with the special committees, the Senate Special Committee on Aging and the Senate Small Business and Entrepreneurship Committee, who are extremely interested in this. That once we got beyond the fact that they'd never heard of senior entrepreneurship, we just sort of rolled right ahead with our presentation about what it is and what it can do for the economy. And they definitely they're planning on hosting a congressional hearing on this topic in the fall, which again is something that's very positive and changing this entire paradigm.
Well,
so
that's
I think
all very,
probably the next one.
Yeah, that's very encouraging. And as we move to the next one, and once again, to remind everyone that you can go ahead and enter your questions in the box that you see on your screen, and please do so. We already have some questions, and we're going to be turning to those very shortly. So as we move to this slide, what are the other initiatives that are developing in this area?
Yes, two I'd like to call out in particular, since the first one is Elizabeth's organization, Senior Entrepreneurship Works, which you heard about at the beginning of the call. Second one, which we've also referred to a little bit, was that AARP, in response to its members' needs in terms of continuing to work longer, has a partnership with the Small Business Administration around 50-plus entrepreneurship. Essentially, what they want to do here is move about 100,000 AARP members a year through what they call Encore Entrepreneurship courses. So really online courses so people can better understand if they have a viable business idea and get skills, and some offline, i.e. like meetings in cities where people can go and learn more about what it takes to get a business started, to get it capitalized, et cetera. And Kaufman, again, an organization mentioned at the beginning, who said they collect a lot of data on entrepreneurship. They themselves, just in the last year, developed a special track of their Fast Track New Venture program, which is, again, an education program for entrepreneurs that's specifically focused on the boomer entrepreneur. And they're going to slowly start rolling that out in different cities. For more information about both of those, you can easily just Google those keywords right there on the page, and you'll find several links to stories, and the press has covered both recently.
Well, and finally, as we come towards the end, and we move to the next slide, is there something around this that's already happening around the world? You already talked about Ireland. What else is going on?
Well, there's been interesting research from the Netherlands, and we can send that to people if they're interested in it. Nesta.org in the UK has done a phenomenal research project, and they have a report on that as well called 5 Hours a Day, Systemic Innovation for an Aging Population. And at the bottom of the slide is the OECD 2012 report on senior entrepreneurship, where they have a whole action plan for senior entrepreneurship that goes through the year 2020. And again, that's why I had said that in many ways, the rest of the world is ahead of the U.S., or certainly the Europe and the United Kingdom are ahead of us in terms of garnering data and research on this topic, but it's growing rapidly. I was invited to present a proposal to the International Federation on Aging, which is taking place in Istanbul this fall, and it's in partnership with colleagues of mine from the Babson Entrepreneurship School and from the business school in Istanbul. So it's rapidly, and Korea is another country that is extremely interested in this. North Africa is extremely interested in entrepreneurship, as is the Middle East. So people, again, are just really realizing the power in this demographic, not only the size of it, but the expertise embedded in it. And we're really at the cutting edge of something that is really quite phenomenal. I feel at my point in life to be on the cutting edge of something like this is truly a gift, and to be able to participate in it. So I think that's what's happening in the global arena, and we'll turn it back over to you, John, for the next slide.
And as we move to the next slide, we'll bring Stacey in and turn to you for a moment. Atlantic Philanthropies has supported this work as an important aspect of developing aging careers. Could you tell us something about what you see as opportunities for funders who are interested in helping new entrepreneurs, and particularly any special advice you may have for smaller or local funders?
Sure. I just wanted to preface and say that our work around this came about through our older adult civic engagement portfolio, where we were focusing on volunteerism, lifelong learning, and employment for older adults. And we supported less in the area of employment over the years, and so the summit was a great opportunity for us to extend our reach. I think this type of work is relevant to funders who are not only interested in aging, but also those that are interested in economic development and social improvements, the way that Greg and Elizabeth talked about. As the slide shows, there are lots of different ways that funders can be engaged in big or small ways. You can look at business competitions for older adults at the local level or even at the national level. Supporting multi-generational networking programs, looking at mentoring and how do you support those who are looking for how to learn how to be an entrepreneur, so internships for older adults. How about that is another way that funders can support programmatic type of work. And then there's also looking at training courses that are add-ons to traditional training that's offered. We also are talking about more supporting micro-enterprise and early-stage grants and loans, microloans that can be offered in conjunction with government in terms of the Small Business Administration, and then funding research to look at more this cohort of boomers and senior entrepreneurs and why and how we can develop them and what skills and what other resources we can develop to support them in their work. I wanted to also share that funders, especially local funders, can support the convening of summits like this in their regions or in their communities, bringing people like Elizabeth and Greg to their communities to share what's going on in other parts of the country. There's also the opportunity to do community assessments to just assess what kind of momentum already exists in your community. So it can be smaller investments. You can do small grants, as we talked about before. At the Cleveland Foundation, there was a social innovation lab where grants were given up to the amount of $25,000 to help entrepreneurs with innovative community solutions. So something like that model could be used to start up and incentivize the community to think about this issue. And then supporting universities and community colleges with coursework, as we mentioned before. The Community Foundation of Southeastern Michigan has invested in promising work around Wayne State University and its Tech Town and Boom the new economy work. And then there's another foundation, the Southwest Initiative Foundation in Minnesota. They've developed a micro enterprise loan program with the Small Business Administration where they serve as a loan intermediary. So there are lots of, I think, sparks that are coming out of this that can help local funders or funders thinking about small investments that can plant seeds in a region and start this idea going.
Well, that's all very exciting, and thank you for sharing some specific examples from the local environment. Sometimes folks feel like if you're not a major national or international foundation, it's hard to support this kind of work. But I want to turn now to our questions. We have some questions from our audience, and we'll go straight to that. And this is an interesting one having to do with health insurance. So what data have you found about the cost of health insurance as a barrier to entrepreneurship for older adults? And a related question, will the Affordable Care Act help people looking to become entrepreneurs, especially those at 50 plus, feel more comfortable about taking the risk to leave employment that offers benefits?
That is an excellent question. And in fact, there is a bit of data on this. We certainly do know that where people have access to health care through an employer and don't have it beyond, that they really are much less likely to make the move into self-employment, to take the risk on themselves. And in reference to the second part of the question, there's no direct evidence there, but what we are seeing with young adults who have been extended on their parents' insurance till about age 27, I believe, is that there's a lot more than anecdotal evidence that they're using that to take the time to do things like attempt to establish their own businesses while they're covered under their parents' insurance. And for a lot of them, again, this is anecdotal, but there's a very interesting article in the Wall Street Journal about kids who essentially are saying, I have to get this done by 27 or else, because once they go off and would have to get their own insurance, they're more likely to think, I better get at least a steady wage and salary job for a while. So it does seem to be a big factor. A lot of people, when they say why they don't take this course of action, say, they have a great concern about finding health care when they're off on their own. And with that, I'll turn to Elizabeth.
The other point that comes up in relation to that is that if you're starting a business and hiring employees, how do you need to offer health care benefits to that employee? And that, again, we're all waiting to find out how the Affordable Care Act is going to come down on that, but that is something that is, again, holding people back from making this move. And the only way that people who have countered that to date is there's a woman in California who has a wonderful business called Mannequin Madness. She has her own website if anybody wants to look it up. But she recycles, repairs, resells old mannequins, and that's another green business opportunity. And I asked her, I said, no, you're doing this all over the country now. I said, are you thinking of hiring additional employees? And she said very directly, she said, I really cannot afford to do that. So what I do is I hire independent contractors who are willing to work on their own. And she said, I advance employment opportunities through that means, and then they receive the major portion of the revenue that comes in from their sales or their work on the mannequins, and she just receives a small portion of it for almost like a royalty or a licensing payment. And so there are people who are trying to think creatively of how can I still do this if they cannot afford to hire employees and give them those benefits.
Thanks. Those are important issues, and of course, as ACA rolls out this year, the Affordable Care Act, there's a lot of unknowns still, even though we're within now 8 months of its full implementation. The second issue was something it's actually a comment rather than a question, saying that there was a Harvard Business Review that just came out that has a link about reducing, quote, infant entrepreneur mortality. That is something about that most small businesses, of course, die very young. And some ways to keep this going among senior entrepreneurs. So the question here is, are there ways in which you think senior entrepreneurs can avoid this tendency for small businesses particularly and new businesses to die off quickly? Are there lessons that have been learned in this arena?
Well, again, that we're doing research on that and to get real quantitative data, but anecdotally, we have evidence that senior business startups fail at a much smaller rate than brand new young people's business startups. And what we want to find out, is that attributed to their life experience and their business experience or just their whole life experience. But anecdotally, we do know that new businesses fail less than the younger businesses, which is an astounding statistic. And so that's, again, why we really want to get some quantifiable data around that.
Okay.
And John, this is Greg. Just one more interesting dimension on that. The summit that Elizabeth mentioned that was planned for upcoming in San Francisco, the group out there are actually particularly interested in the ability of senior entrepreneurs working with young startups to, as they put it, mitigate failure risk, or as they actually put it, to have these companies fail faster or not fail. So they really do believe that by doing multi-generational kind of teams, essentially this similar to mentors or advisors, but making it much more part of the organization or business right from the beginning, that they can, solve some of this problem that, in fact, yes, most businesses don't fare well, and very few get beyond the first year.
We have time for one last question before I turn to the three of you for final comments. And that is, obviously most of the discussion about this is around small and even micro business, as you say. Are there examples of larger scale businesses that have been created by this population?
Yes. Again, going back to Senior Enterprise Ireland, for example, in this instance, they have everything from people working out of their cottages in Ireland to someone that created a multi-million-dollar jelly bean factory. In this country, we have someone like Conti Bretos in Florida who started by creating one assisted living center that was much more humane than public housing or other assisted living centers, but still it was for people to be able to pay for through their Medicare. And that one housing facility in Central Florida has spread to 3 in Florida, 12 nationwide, and is growing at a phenomenal rate. So this is just a woman who is passionate about creating a more humane environment for seniors to live in assisted living that has grown. It's now a multi-million-dollar business. So there's the complete range, and some of it is, and people will say, well, why is it that people can't grow their businesses? And a very important thing to remember here is that not everybody wants to have a multi-million-dollar business. Some people just want a very small business to remain engaged and to supplement their income. So it runs the entire gamut from that to the gazelle-like multi-million-dollar business.
Well, with that, we're going to have to bring it to a close and ask each of you to give a final comment. And Elizabeth, I'll start with you.
Thank you. Well, again, thank you, John, for this opportunity and for this, in a way, that Stacey was talking about, extending the summit into local regions and territories and just from what is happening in your own community. And I feel this call or this webinar is really the start of that. It's planting the idea, and I think it needs, there's so many ways in which it can be explored, but I cannot think of a single way in which it is not beneficial for seniors and their communities.
Thanks. Greg?
Well, I think I'd like you to take away one thing from this webinar. I think what we really are trying to get across is that seniors are extremely valuable resource for entrepreneurship. And I think Stacey said this extremely well as well, and that the benefits from engaging them and helping them in their own business creation, but also helping them to support new or younger and existing entrepreneurs will really sort of spread the wealth of the experience that older adults have. And that experience, I think, is something we've really, especially with the summit, tried to figure out how can we tap this. Because, again, like older adults, it's one of our greatest growing natural resources, as Mark Friedman would put it. And any way we can get that resource out there to let it fully flourish or to let it help younger entrepreneurs develop their businesses or shape new businesses, I think that's very, very important.
Stacey?
I was just going to say that I didn't say this earlier, but I was lucky enough to attend the summit, and I found it extremely stimulating. The enthusiasm around this idea and from the different participants was palpable. So there's something very special about this topic, and there was energy around older adults, not only pursuing self-actualization in their retirement years, but also, highly focused on the economic necessity to do so. And I think this topic is extremely timely right now and reflects the need for us to support the energy and experience of older adults as entrepreneurs and our critical need to address our current retirement income deficit that's going on. So it's a win, I think, in so many ways, and I think we'll hear more about this in the coming years.
Well, thanks. I want to thank Elizabeth Isele, the co-founder and CEO of Senior Entrepreneurship Works, Greg O'Neill, the director of the National Academy on an Aging Society of the Gerontological Society of America, and Stacey Easterling, the program executive at the Atlantic Philanthropies, for their expert presentations today. I want to thank all of you for everything you do to make life better for America's older adults. I also want to thank the John A. Hartford Foundation and the Atlantic Philanthropies for their support of this program, as well as the American Society on Aging for their technical expertise. And finally, we want to thank all of you for participating in today's webinar. Have a great day.